June 18, 1815, 11:30 a.m., near Waterloo, Belgium. The ground is soaked from overnight rain. Mud grips boots. Cannon wheels sink deep into soft earth. Across rolling fields, two armies stare at one another. On one side, Napoleon Bonaparte, returned from exile, reclaiming power in France during the 100 Days. He has one objective: defeat the Allied armies quickly before they can unite. On the other side, the Duke of Wellington, British commander, calm, reserved, defensive. Somewhere to the east, marching hard through mud and exhaustion, Field Marshal Gebhard Leberecht von Blücher and the Prussian army. If they arrive in time, Napoleon faces a two-front battle. If they don't, he might win. To understand Waterloo, you must understand Napoleon in 1815. He was not the unstoppable emperor of Austerlitz. He was older. His army was rebuilt quickly. Experienced veterans mixed with raw recruits. France was exhausted from decades of war. Europe's monarchies were united in one purpose: remove Napoleon permanently. When he escaped from Elba in March 1815, many French troops sent to arrest him instead joined him. But time was limited. Coalition armies were mobilizing. Napoleon's strategy was classic: strike fast, separate enemies, defeat them individually before they can combine. He moved north into Belgium, aiming to split Wellington's Anglo-Allied forces from Blücher's Prussians. On June 16th, Napoleon defeated the Prussians at Ligny, but they were not destroyed. Critically, they retreated in good order, not eastward, but north, staying within supporting distance of Wellington. Napoleon believed they were finished. He was wrong. June 18th begins slowly. Napoleon delays the main attack until late morning. The wet ground makes artillery less effective. Cannonballs will not bounce and tear through ranks as cleanly in mud. He waits for the ground to dry. That delay matters. Every hour increases the chance of Prussian arrival. The battlefield itself is deceptively simple. Wellington positions his army along a low ridge, reverse slope defense. His infantry stand just behind the crest, hidden from French artillery. 3 fortified strongpoints anchor his line: Hougoumont on the right, La Haye Sainte in the center, Papelotte on the left. Napoleon's forces deploy opposite: infantry columns, massed artillery, elite Imperial Guard in reserve. The battle begins with a diversionary attack on Hougoumont. It escalates quickly. What was meant to be limited becomes a grinding struggle. French forces commit thousands of troops to seize the farmhouse complex. They never fully capture it. The fight at Hougoumont drains French manpower all day. Around 1:30 p.m., Napoleon launches a major assault against Wellington's center-left. D'Erlon's corps advances in massive infantry columns, drums beating, flags waving. But Wellington's infantry wait behind the ridge. At close range, British and Allied troops rise and fire volleys, devastating musket fire, then heavy cavalry charges into disordered French ranks. The French attack collapses. Casualties mount. But Napoleon still believes victory is possible. Mid-afternoon, a critical misunderstanding. Marshal Ney, commanding part of the French army, believes Wellington is retreating. He sees movement behind the ridge. It is wounded being evacuated. But Ney interprets it as withdrawal. Without full infantry support, he launches massive cavalry charges. Thousands of French horsemen thunder uphill, swords drawn. They crest the ridge and find British infantry formed in squares, hollow rectangles of bayonets. Cavalry cannot break disciplined squares without infantry or artillery support. The charges repeat, again and again. Cavalry horses tire, men fall. The British squares hold. Napoleon watches. Valuable cavalry strength is wasted, and still no sign of Prussians fully engaged. But they are coming. In the distance to the east, cannon thunder grows louder. Blücher's lead elements are reaching the battlefield. Napoleon detaches troops to contain them. Now he faces exactly what he wanted to avoid: two armies at once. The window for victory is closing. By late afternoon, the sound from the east is no longer distant. It is immediate. Blücher's Prussians are not retreating. They are arriving. Columns of Prussian infantry emerge near the village of Plancenoit on Napoleon's right flank. Napoleon reacts quickly. He sends elements of his army, including parts of the Young Guard, to hold them back. The fighting around Plancenoit becomes savage, street to street, bayonet to bayonet. French forces push Prussians out. Prussians surge back in. Every battalion Napoleon diverts east weakens his pressure against Wellington. But if he ignores them, his army risks encirclement. This is the trap he tried to avoid from the start. Around 6 p.m., La Haye Sainte, the farmhouse anchoring Wellington's center, finally falls to the French after brutal fighting. This is Napoleon's moment. With that position taken, French artillery can now fire directly into the Allied center at close range. Wellington's line is strained. Casualties are heavy. Some Allied units are near breaking. If Napoleon strikes decisively now, he might still win. He prepares his final weapon, the Imperial Guard. Veterans of countless campaigns, elite, disciplined, feared across Europe. They have never been defeated in battle. Napoleon holds them in reserve for one reason: to deliver the decisive blow. As evening approaches, Napoleon orders elements of the Middle Guard forward. They march uphill toward Wellington's center, drums steady, formation tight. This is the last gamble. If the Guard breaks through, Wellington's army may collapse before Prussian pressure becomes overwhelming. As the Guard advances, Wellington's men lie hidden behind the ridge. The French crest the slope, and suddenly, at close range, British Guards regiments rise from behind the ridge. A volley, devastating. The Imperial Guard staggers. They try to deploy into line. Another volley, close range, musket smoke thick in the air. British troops shout, "Up, Guards, and at them!" Counterattack begins. The Imperial Guard begins to fall back. Then something unthinkable spreads through French ranks. The Guard recoils! Panic. If the Guard retreats, what hope remains? Simultaneously, Prussian pressure intensifies on the French right. Plancenoit falls again. French lines begin bending, then breaking. The retreat becomes disorder. Artillery abandoned. Infantry scatter. Cavalry attempts to cover withdrawal. Napoleon tries to rally troops personally, but the collapse accelerates. By nightfall, the French army is in full retreat. What began as controlled withdrawal becomes rout. Thousands captured. Guns lost. The myth of Napoleon's invincibility shatters permanently. Waterloo does not just end a battle, it ends an era. Napoleon abdicates again within days. This time, there will be no return. He is exiled to Sainte Helena, a remote island in the South Atlantic. There he will die in 1821. The Congress of Vienna reshapes Europe. Borders redrawn, monarchies restored, a balance of power system established to prevent another Napoleon. For nearly a century, Europe avoids continent-wide war, until 1914. Waterloo becomes symbolic, the moment ambition meets coalition, the moment tactical brilliance cannot overcome strategic isolation, the moment timing determines destiny. Had Napoleon attacked earlier? Had the rain not delayed artillery? Had the Prussians been delayed another few hours? History might look different. But in war, timing is everything. And on June 18, 1815, time ran out. Waterloo teaches a hard, strategic truth. Even the greatest commanders depend on coordination, intelligence, and timing. Overconfidence in previous victories can blind leaders to shifting realities. Napoleon believed speed and aggression would compensate for political isolation. But Europe had adapted. His enemies cooperated. And once two armies united against him, even the Imperial Guard could not change the outcome. If you want to understand how one battlefield reshaped an entire continent and how power can vanish in a single evening, stay with this channel, because some defeats echo for centuries.